is a picture of the first steam-powered icebreaker, and this is a modern nuclear icebreaker operating at the North Pole. It bears the name 50 Years of Victory, referring to the Allied victory in World War II. This is Yamal, the second largest icebreaker in the world. And if you ask us, it looks much cooler. Every morning, sailors on board an icebreaker wake up to the sound of 10-foot or 3-meter shards of ice breaking beneath the ship's hull. At all times, the crew must be prepared for the worst-case scenario because at any point, the ship could grind to a halt and get frozen. You see, icebreakers are specialized ships that are made to navigate through ice-covered water at the North Pole. Here is the 50 Years of Victory icebreaker touching the ice barrier and breaking through it. Without losing speed, the icebreaker continued charging forward with a speed of 15 knots or 28 kilometers per hour. The ship has a special horn at the bottom to break the ice. For comparison, check out the bottom of an ordinary ship. See how smooth the bottom of the ship is? Now compare that to the horn on the icebreaker. That's what 50 Years of Victory uses to break through the thick ice. But you might not have known that the ship has something called a blubber system under the waterline. There are rows and rows of small holes. Air is pushed out of the holes, and this acts as a lubricant to push ice shards away from the reinforced hull of the ship. These giant ships are mainly used to help maintain passage through the northern seas. These ships usually tow smaller ships that cannot navigate through the thick ice of the frozen waters. But they have to pass almost immediately after the icebreaker clears the path, otherwise the water can freeze again. The 50 Let Pobedy has a special V-notch stern. This is used during close-coupled towing. In extreme weather, when the chance of frozen oceans is very high, this giant icebreaker will tie a smaller ship to the back of it and tow it across the North Pole. At some points during the journey, the pilot and the crew of the icebreaker could smash that like button just like you should if you haven't done so already. But no, in all seriousness, the crew could come across ice so thick that they cannot cross or break it. These are called pressure ridges. To avoid being frozen in place, the ship will go back and forth until the ice starts to give. Once broken, the icebreaker continues ahead with the usual speed. Look at this helmsman steering the ship with a tiny wheel. It looks like he's controlling a little boat, but look at the turns he's making with those small and barely noticeable movements. The wheel steering is translated into rudder movement thanks to these gigantic pistons below. And the interesting thing is, the bridge where the ship is mainly operated is always open to tourists. What do you mean by tourists? You heard that right. Captain Dmitry Lobusov and the 189 crewmen on board the 50 Years of Victory icebreakers are usually accompanied by tourists. They're not always alone on this nuclear-powered behemoth. During certain months of the year, the ship will take on a few tours, allowing tourists to board the ship and see how these giant marvels of human engineering operate up close. It costs around $45,000 for the privilege. In fact, on board the Yamal, the second largest icebreaker in the world, tourists were invited during the maiden voyage of the ship. As the 23,000-ton ship sailed through the waters at 20 knots in 1994, tourists could enjoy the warm and comfortable lodging, food, drinks, and a lot of music. When the temperature was around -9 degrees Fahrenheit, the tourists went outside and celebrated with a barbecue and some drinks. When they got to the North Pole at the 90-90 coordinates, every way people looked, they were facing south. The ship's captain, Smirnov, organized a swimming party. To stop, they either used the 90-ton conventional anchor or the smaller ice anchors on board the ship. When they need to deploy the supplies like grills and sitting benches with tables, they use a giant crane to do the job. Now, to make sure no polar bears get near the tourists, armed polar bear guards surround the group and keep any predators away. So in short, the tourists get their own private security. That day, the first person ever recorded to swim at the North Pole was a man by the name of Will Roundtree. In 2007, another record was set by Lewis Gordon Poe when he swam a kilometer at the North Pole. Lewis got to the North Pole by sailing on board the Yamal. Inside, the tourists could talk to the captain and crew. They could enjoy a night of dancing and drinking at the bar, and the entire time, they could feast on a buffet of authentic Russian comfort food. If you ask us, the Yamal looks much more interesting than the 50 Years of Victory. Why? because of that shark mouth tattoo on the front. When filmed at the top or the side, it looks like the ship is actually eating up the giant ice shards. It's interesting to note that this Arctica-class icebreaker that's 486 feet or 148 meters long and 98 feet or 30 meters wide cannot operate in tropical waters. The nuclear reactors need the freezing cold temperatures of the north to cool the nuclear reactors. Speaking of nuclear reactors, there are two of them powering the 50 Years of Victory icebreaker, and the twin reactor covers are visible on the deck of the ship. These two reactors provide the ship with 75,000 horsepower and allow it to reach a maximum speed of 18.6 knots. Tourists can also visit the steam turbine hall where the reactors are located and see how this giant ship can keep breaking 10-foot thick ice without losing speed. The secret is steam. You see, the reactors heat water that turns into steam. The superheated steam then smashes that subscribe button and then rings the notification bell. But no, in all seriousness, it goes into the turbines and begins to move them. This movement then helps the electric generators to start moving and produce the electrical power needed for the icebreaker to work. Because the icebreaker can generate its own power, it has an endurance of about 4 to 5 years. The electric power is used for everything on board the 50 Years of Victory, from the kitchen stoves to the 3 giant propellers, each of which has 4 fixed-pitch blades. Of course, there are a couple of spare blades on board the icebreaker. They will be used in case of an emergency. Of course, the journey on board the 50 Years of Victory is made that much better by the helicopter on the ship. There is a 1 helicopter helipad and tourists can take turns flight seeing. The Mi-2 helicopter can accommodate up to 6 people, including the pilot. The first 2 seats are facing forward and give you a much better look at the ship and the North Pole. Right behind them, there are 3 rear-facing seats. After a ride around the icebreaker ship, passengers will have a chance to take pictures or capture video of the mesmerizing landscape before touching down and exiting. All the tourists get to go on a flight-seeing adventure in groups of 4 people, but sometimes the schedule changes if the weather conditions worsen. If the passengers want, they can decide to rent the helicopter for around $2,000 for a 30-minute ride. If there's a group of 5 people, that comes to $400 per person, and who knows, maybe during your journey, you'll see some walruses resting on the ice. Once they get back to the icebreaker, tourists can enjoy the rest of their day by playing badminton in the mini gym, riding a bike, or even swimming in the indoor pool. What surprised us was the fact that there is a barbershop on board the icebreaker. We thought, who would need to take a haircut during a 2-week journey? But then we remembered that the crews are deployed for the better part of the year, and it started to make more sense. To make the experience more memorable, the sailors on board the icebreaker will commonly spot guillemots flying by, duvekis flying away from the giant ship as they're frightened by the giant ship, and sometimes even a polar bear. Here you can clearly see the mama polar bear traversing the ice looking for food for her young. The freezing temperatures might be a challenge, but you cannot deny the beauty of the North Pole. Bye for now.